Hi, Soumya.
I will just make you the presenter and you can then share your screen.
Sure. We can start at sharp 8 p.m.
8 o'clock. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I have made you the presenter.
Sure. Give me a second. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. We can wait. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's 8 o'clock. We should start. I'll start with the recording first.
Sure, I'm ready.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay,
Okay.
welcome everyone. So, my name is Soumya, and I'll be your host for this session. So, before starting, I would request everyone to go on mute. And if you have any questions throughout the session, you can send them through chatbot or you can unmute and ask. So, let me introduce you to Tech Canvas first. So, Tech Canvas is an IT certification training organization for professionals wherein we help students to crack their certification exams in first attempt. Being an authorized training center for IIBA Canada and ISQI Germany, we conduct all the IIBA app, and we also train people for agile analysis certification. And we are also authorized training partner of Project Management Institute PMI for PMP certification. And we also have domain courses into banking, finance, healthcare, and many more. So today we'll be discussing on getting under the hood of PMBOK 7 guide, as you can see on your screens. And our speaker for the session is Janaki Ram. So Janaki has 15 plus years of experience in the software industry, including roles such as project manager, engineering manager, development manager, and delivery manager. He has end-to-end experience in successfully delivering projects on both predictive and adaptive agile approaches. He's certified on PMP PMI, CSM Scrum Alliance, MCSD Microsoft, and he's also a PMI ATP PMP instructor. So from here, I request Janki to take the session ahead. And thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful session.
Sure. Uh, Thanks, Somya. And thanks, everyone, for joining today. And as Somya has introduced, today's topic is getting under the hood of PMBOK 7th edition. Right. Uh, Somya has given a brief. So, we are an IT certification training company since 2011. We are PMI authorized training provider, particularly on PMP, and we are also IABA endorsed education provider. So about me, I'm a PMI authorized PMP instructor, 15 plus years of experience and 13 plus in project management. I'm a project management professional from PMI, certified Scrum Master from Scrum Alliance, and during my good old programming days, I used to be a Microsoft certified solution developer. So who is this webinar for, right? So for those who are looking for PMP certification, right? Uh, this happens to be the latest edition of PMBOK from PMI. I'll explain what it is in a while. So it will be very useful for you. And for those who are PMP certified and you're still exploring what's the industry trend going on right now, right? So PMBOK, as you might know, is a collection of standards and best practices across industries and project management. And every new edition that PMI brings the best practices along with it, right? So it will be useful for existing PMP certified professionals as well. And in case you are new to PM role and you are exploring what it takes to be a successful project manager, this edition will still be very useful for you. So what is the agenda today, right? We'll quickly look at what the PMBOK history is. We'll understand what is PMBOK and what's the history behind it. And PMBOK has a radical shift from process-based approach in project management to principles-based approach. We'll look at what is the difference and why do we need a principles-based approach. We'll talk about the 12 principles that come with PMBOK 7, and then we'll talk about value delivery system, right? And then finally, we'll talk about the performance domains and tailoring that gets mentioned in the PMBOK 7th edition. So, what is PMBOK, right? PMBOK expands to project management body of knowledge, right? So it is a consolidation of best practices and standards in project management across industries, and it is compiled by PMI, which is Project Management Institute. And Project Management Institute is a non-profit organization. It's a US based organization. They are non-profit, and they are the ones who regulate the PMP exam. So what is this book all about, right? So PMBOK guide is one of the major reference guides for the PMP exam. I have put it in quotes because it is not the only reference guide for your PMP exam. It is one of the major reference guide. And in fact, if you go to PMI site, you would find other reference guides, any reference books that they would recommend for you to successfully clear the PMP exam. So the latest edition is the seventh edition, which roughly came 2 months back. The previous edition is the sixth edition of PMBOK, which is still relevant for the PMP exam. So for your PMP exam, you would need primarily the sixth edition of PMBOK as well as the seventh edition for reference. And so, what does this seventh edition contain? Right? It contains some radical changes. If you look throughout the history of PMBOK editions, the latest edition is completely radical, and we will see why in a while. Right. So, primarily, there is a huge shift from process-based approach towards project management towards principles-based approach. When we look at what are principles and why do we need them in our session today. And it also includes something called value delivery system. The earlier PMBOK editions never considered value at the top of the hierarchy, but PMBOK dedicates a complete chapter in the seventh edition for value delivery. So how is it structured? So how is the PMBOK guide structured? We have two parts to it. The first part is the standard, right? It carries the ANSI standard and it contains two different topics: value delivery system and the principles of project management. The second part is the actual guide to project management body of knowledge. So it contains performance domains, which we'll look at today, tailoring, models, methods, and artifacts. So, where did we come from, right? Where did PMBOK originate? How did it evolve, and where do we stand today? It was 1969 that PMI was founded, but it was not until 1996 that we had the first edition of PMBOK. It is at this point that PMI realized that a lot of uh, industries have a common set of best practices and standards that we need to compile and use it as our uh, first edition for PMBOK. And then in 2000, there were 9 knowledge areas introduced and 39 processes. This is the first time that the PMBOK edition had knowledge areas. In 2004 again, there was a increase in the process count to 44. In 2008, there were 6 constraints that were added. In 2013, we had a new knowledge area called stakeholder management, which got introduced. In 2017, we had agile practices introduced. And then finally, today, where we stand, we have the PMBOK 7th edition, which has, as I mentioned, a huge shift in thought process when it comes to project management. Now, if you look at this history, you can see that right from first edition, on an average, you'll see around about 4 years of gap when by the time a new edition comes, right? So that's roughly the time when PMI gathers or continuously observes the project management domain across industries and looks for any new practices that comes into market, and then they include them into their next edition. So we'll look at, before we go into the 12 principles of PMBOK 7, we'll look at why the shift came from process to principles. Right? So for those who are familiar with previous editions of PMBOK or who have been PMP certified already in an earlier exam, might be aware of something called IPEMC, right? So it's your typical project management can be categorized into different phases like below, right? We have the initiation phase. Any project would have to go through this. Then we have the planning process group. Then we have the execution process group. Then we have the monitor and control process group. And then finally, we have the closing process group, right? So any project that you take, initiation is the phase where the project is officially recognized as a project, and you get your project from funding at that point of time, right? When we move to planning, this is where we do all our planning work for the project. Like it may be your scope management, or it may be your schedule plan, or it may be your cost planning or resource planning. All the planning gets done in the planning phase, and the execution is where you follow the plan. What are your baseline in the plan? You would go ahead and follow it, and then monitor and control goes hand in hand with execution, where it checks whether the project is going as per plan. And if there is any deviation, monitor and control is where we get the project back on track. And finally, we close the project. This was a classic set of PM process groups. Right? This is completely process based, as you can see. Now, where do we go from here? Right? So evolution is from process based approach towards principle based. And some of you who are already neck deep into project management might have observed various methodologies that came our way, like your agile methodology, or if you consider scaled agile or scaled scrum. They're all principle based, right? They're not process based. So this this is for a reason, right? So the market is completely evolving. If you take the last 20 years, there had been two huge milestones which has increased the competition in the market. The first milestone was way back in the year 2000, when there was an internet boom, right? There was a huge demand for internet-based applications, and a lot of applications and uh, standards start going online over the internet. That was one major milestone. The second major milestone happened again exactly 10 years back when companies started adopting cloud, and today it's in complete boom, right? So as and when these technologies evolved, the competition in the market has increased, uh, where a lot of companies started realizing that sticking to rigid process-based approach is not going to keep them efficient to keep up with the competition. Right. So that's the reason we have this radical shift from process-based to principle-based approach. So what is a principle, right? So why do we need principle, right? Uh, the standard definition says a principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as a foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. Right? But if we have to put this in a layman's term, a principle is a statement that you consider around which you build your implementation or construction as a project manager. We'll look at some examples. Right? So why do we need principles? Now, one problem with the standard process-based approach is that it's very rigid. So earlier we had standard way of handling projects. 20 years back, 25 years back, or 30 years back, we had a standard way of handling projects. So there was not much competition in the market, and people were a bit complacent as to what we were today. The same process was tailored and customized and applied across different situations. Right? But that is not going to work anymore given the volatility in the market that we have today. So some general examples of principle. Right, Mr. Mark is a man of principles and is good to his word. So Mr. Mark here has a personal principle that he'll stand by his word, right? So the fundamental truth that he believes is that he should stand by the word, and every action that he performs from there would be based on this principle. And all internal combustion engines work on the same principle, right? So this is coming from backwards, right? So you realize that you build a fundamental principle how a combustion engine works, and you build your design on top of that. So the principle remains the same, but your implementation is different. Countries must have certain fundamental principles of human rights. This is pretty self-explanatory, right? Two principles of happiness are being kind and smiling a lot. So you can apply this in real life as well. They have a business principle in putting the customer's interests first. This is a good example, right? This can apply to project management as well. So let's take some examples from actual projects. Never start your work before your proposal is acknowledged. So this can be a good principle for a project manager. Right? So you put a proposal to customer, and you may be in a hurry to start the project. But what if the customer does not acknowledge it, right? So we all learn this from our experience. So this can be a principle that you can apply. Always take feedback after you deliver your work. This applies to everyone in the project. Do not work more than two tasks at a time. Again, this applies to everyone in the project as well. And some of the frameworks, modern frameworks, do consider this, right? Agile frameworks like Kanban, REST has something called work in progress limit, which limits the number of work that can be parallelized in a team. Always keep your list of work prioritized. This applies to modern frameworks as well. Right? Communicate objectively when you report work status. So these are some examples from our projects. Right? So we saw what is a principle and some examples in real life. What are the famous or the popular project management principles out there in the market? We have the Agile Manifesto. There are 12 principles for Agile. Those who are certified in Agile area may very well be familiar with this. We have the Prince to 7 principles. We have the 7 principles of Lean again. And Lean and Agile go hand in hand in most of the projects today, as you may be aware. And finally, we have the 12 principles in PMBOK 7, which we'll have a quick look now. Right? And you might have noticed that there is a coincidence here that there are 12 principles in our PMBOK 7 as well as 12 principles of Agile. They both are not the same, it's just a coincidence. Now let us look at the 12 principles of PMBOK 7, which is in the first part of PMBOK 7th edition. Right? The first principle states that be a diligent and respectful and a caring steward. Now, who is a steward, right? Stewardship focuses on promoting well-being for each person within an organization. One of the many ways to promote this well-being is to ensure that each individual is generally happy in his or her working environment. Now, before we even try to understand this, I'll take an example. The word steward is being used in many places in the English language, right? So one common example is a flight attendant. A flight attendant is also known as a steward, right? So why do we have flight attendants in flights? The flight can very well go without a steward, right? You have the pilot, you have the captain. They can take care of it, right? The very reason why we need a flight attendant is that there must be someone who keeps the passengers uh, in a comfortable position. Right? So that is why you see here that the last statement here says that ensure that each individual is generally happy in his or her working environment. So similar to steward in a flight, a project manager has to moderate how the project goes and make sure that in spite of different circumstances that the project goes through, everybody is comfortable in the project in trying to achieve the goal for the project. Right? It takes a couple of features, a couple of characteristics for a project manager to do that. The first one is integrity. Right? Integrity, if I have to put it in simple words, follow what you preach. Right? That is a good example of integrity. Care, trustworthiness, and compliance. So, and when it comes to PMI, they have something called code of ethics as well. So we have set of code of ethics from PMI that applies to this. So a project manager has to play the role of a steward in the process of achieving the goal that the project is trying to succeed. The second principle says create a collaborative project team environment. Right? What is collaboration? Team collaboration is a communication and project management approach that emphasizes teamwork, innovative thinking, and equal participation to achieve objectives. So the last line is very important. So why do we collaborate? Because we want to achieve the objectives the most efficient manner, right? And in the process, we are innovative and we have equal participation. So that is the reason we have this principle that teams must be collaborative and a project manager needs to ensure that. Right? The goal is to complete the project efficiently. So that should not be forgotten. We need collaboration because we need to efficiently achieve the goal. Better be part of the corporate culture. Right? If it is part of a corporate culture, it becomes easier. If not, the project manager has to take the onus on himself. And better technology helps with better collaboration. That goes on without saying. The next principle is effectively engage with stakeholders. Now, who is a stakeholder? If to put it simple, a stakeholder is anyone who can either affect your project or who gets affected by your project. It can be your project manager, it can be yourself as a project manager, it can be your customer, it can be your senior management, it can be your project team, it can be the end user. Anyone who is impacted by the project or who can impact the project is a stakeholder. This is from a PMI perspective as well. And for you to effectively engage stakeholders, you need to identify stakeholders. And from best practices perspective, in this principle, the earlier you identify your stakeholders, the more, the higher the chances of your project succeeding its goal efficiently. Right? Engage the stakeholders, analyze their influence. Right? Stakeholders uh, can be categorized under different categories, right? Based on their power, based on their influence, based on their interest in the project, right? You can categorize the stakeholders based on this, and you can communicate with them based on their category. Most importantly, collaborate with the stakeholders as the project progresses. So, the first step, you have identified the stakeholders. The second step, you have engaged them. You have briefed them about the project's goals, and you have analyzed them, and finally you collaborate with them as the project progresses. Collaboration includes communication, reporting to them on the project process, and if there is any course correction required, you cooperate and coordinate with them in doing that. So that's about stakeholders. The next principle talks about value. Right, the until the PMBOK 6th edition, there was not much stress on value, right? Except for the fact that there was 50% agile as a part of the syllabus for PMP exam. But value is agile is completely value centric. Like everything revolves around value in agile, right? And what is value? And you'll be surprised to know that there is no standard definition for value, right? Because value means different for different people. For example, for a profit based organization, any economical profit is any financial profit is of good value, right? For a non-profit organization, it need not be financial. It can be goodwill. It can be greater goals achieved with respect to their company strategy. So there is no standard definition for value, but you can broadly put something like this, right? It is the worth or usefulness or importance of the deliverable that you give, or you can say the outcome of the benefit from the deliverable that the user experiences can also be called as value. Right? It can be financial, it can be an opportunity for your company, it can be a customer impact, right? That may bring more business. It can be a social benefit. So this is value, and part of the PMBOK 7th edition has a value delivery system defined, and a system for value delivery, and it uh, considers value across all layers of organization, right from portfolio management till the your project management and operations management. So next principle is recognize, evaluate, and respond to system interactions. This is more so applicable with our the approaching trends in project management, right? So the projects are getting more and more complex as days progress. So with more complexity, we must be able to deal with systemic thinking. Right? We have two types of thinking, right? Design thinking and system thinking. So it's important that a project manager imbibes these kinds of thinking in the project team. So it says project teams must realize the holistic view of the project as a system. A project may behave like a subsystem as a part of a larger system. If I have to put it simple for you, every project team member should understand the big picture. As long as he understands the big picture, the delivery that he makes comes with a better quality. Right? Understand business areas, big picture focus, as I mentioned, challenge assumptions, right? So this is also called as challenging the status quo. This is more encouraged in modern frameworks, right? Even PMBOK 7th edition encourages challenging the status quo indirectly. Uh, Earlier, the standard way of project management, how project teams behaved was we form a set of rules and we follow them for eternity. Now, that is not considered as a good practice anymore. The teams are encouraged to challenge the status quo. They are asked to question why we are doing it this way when we don't find it efficient. Seek external review, right? Sometimes the third eye helps in what we are delivering. So that's a good practice. So this principle helps there. So that's with the fifth principle. Now, sixth principle is demonstrate leadership behaviors, right? So this applies to project manager primarily, but doesn't limit to himself, right? Leadership is not only limited to a project manager. So effective leadership ensures positive outcome of the project. Also, leadership is not limited only to project manager. So it can vary from anything, right? It can deal with applying emotional intelligence as a project manager. It can also deal with leadership styles, right? So one aspect is adapt to situation, right? So all modern frameworks encourage change. They encourage change. So earlier, the classic styles of project management was not welcoming change, right? They were resistant to change. So every change that comes their way, it had to go through a lot of uh, diligence. It had to go through a lot of review to be approved or rejected, right? So modern frameworks encourage change. That way, we should be able to adapt to any situation. Exhibit integrity and ethics, right? Even we had talked about this, the principle about being a steward. Directive action during chaos, right? One thing that a project team looks for in a chaotic situation is someone who can take a rational decision, right? That's a good leadership skill. The ability to take directive action, rational decision during chaotic situations. Eye on vision, right? So what is a vision? Vision is a guiding star for the project, right? A vision statement typically is given at the beginning of the project, and everything that you drive from there should be surrounded around the vision. So a project manager or a leader should keep his eye on the vision, make sure we do not deviate away from the vision. So that's with the sixth principle. The seventh principle is tailor based on context. Again, we have a separate topic in the PMBOK 7th edition which talks about tailoring. Right? So tailoring is selecting the relevant process, policy, or standard for the project based on the context of the project or organization. Again, this is not something new to project management, but then again, it has been included as a principle just so we do not lose sight of it. Right? Every project is unique, right? And by definition in PMI, the projects are unique. If you are doing something repetitive, it is not considered as a project, rather as an operation. Right? You can tailor the methodology. Your project may suit the classic waterfall, or it may suit the adaptive agile methodology. Right? You can tailor the methodology. You can tailor the standards, the procedures. So that's about tailoring. So the eighth principle is build quality into processes and deliverables. And this is also nothing new. It has been part of project management for a while. Again, this is a fundamental principle that is very much required. And we all know what quality is, right? There are varied definitions, right? Some say it's conformance to requirements, some say it's fit for use. But again, end of the day, meeting the intended purpose of the project is the primary goal of the quality. It may also include fit for use verification. So you may meet the primary goal of the project, but is it fit for use? Is it scalable? Is your deliverable scalable? So all those things come into picture. So conformation to requirements is one aspect of quality, right? How much is your deliverable reliable, right? It may behave well when you are demonstrating, but how would it behave in different situations? Performance, resilience, right? Resilience stands for ability to recover from failure. So we have a principle on that as well. Complexity, right? I mentioned earlier in a earlier principle that projects are getting more and more complex. That is because as times are changing, the systems are having a lot of subsystems. And lots of subsystems and a lot of subcomponents mean that we have higher complexity and we have to deal with it. Complexity can be sum total or a combination of below factors, right? So let's see that. Number of subsystems, right? Depending on your project, right? If you have higher number of subsystems, the complexity will be higher because there are a lot of moving parts. Number of dependencies can also dictate the complexity of a project. If there are higher number of dependencies, the complexity goes higher as well. Ambiguities, right? We have another principle on ambiguities itself. So ambiguities, the more the ambiguity in the project, the higher the complexity. Uncertainties, right? This directly relates to risks. The higher the number of risks, the project becomes complex. Now, principle number 10 says optimize risk responses, right? Now, risk can be positive or negative, right? Positive risk is called opportunity, negative risk is called threat. Now, a lot of project managers ignore positive risks in the sense that they don't even track positive risks. But it's a good practice. Of course, it is beneficial to track positive risks and you increase the probability of the positive risk happening in the project. So, certain aspects of risks that you look at probability, right? For negative risks, you try to reduce the probability, and for positive risks, you try to increase the probability. For negative risks, you try to reduce the impact, and vice versa for positive risks. Something called a risk appetite, right? Sometimes organizations, by nature, some organizations are willing to take risks, right? Because experimentation can bring drastic changes to an organization and bring drastic benefits to an organization, but it has drastic risks as well. So some organizations are willing to take risks, and the amount of risk that they are willing to take or agree for is called risk appetite. There's something called risk threshold. So appetite is how much hungry they are for risk, right? Risk threshold is how much is their capacity to take risks. They may want to draw a line and then not to cross it. So they can define it themselves. The 11th principle is embrace adaptability and resiliency. As I told, resiliency is the ability for a project to recover from failure. Right? Adaptability is self-explainable. So resiliency is the ability to recover quickly from setbacks due to unanticipated events and bringing the project back to normal state. And we as project managers are probably very familiar with it. Right? Projects have their own ups and downs, particularly medium-sized to large-sized projects. And we should build the project to be resilient beforehand. How do they recover from failures? How quick do they recover from failures? Right? Some techniques are like you can have short feedback loops, like how we have in our agile frameworks, like deliver iteratively, and then get quick feedback so that you reduce the risks in your project. Like continuous improvement, right? Continuously take feedback from your team and if needed from outside the team if there are any room for improvement and keep on improving yourself. Don't wait for things to fail, rather take feedback uh, internally and then continuously improve. Regular inspection, yes, this is your quality inspections. Diverse team with broad skill sets, yes, A diverse team has diverse ideas, diverse thought process that can bring in new ideas and identify any risks beforehand. Transparent planning. So that's with resilience. And the final principle says enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. Right. As I mentioned, more and more modern frameworks are welcoming change. Changes are introduced in a project for it to stay relevant with the outside world. Right. That's the reason we have changes and we have to welcome change. The changes can come from internal or external sources. We have to collaborate with stakeholders. This is probably the most impactful area when you are dealing with change, right? You have to convince the stakeholders if a change is impacting anything in the project, right? It can impact the scope or it can impact the schedule, for example. So that collaboration is very critical. Review and analyze, right? Introduce a culture of change. As I told, introduce a culture where change is acceptable. Now, that those were the 12 principles of PMBOK 7. Right? We'll quickly enter into something called value delivery system. We discussed about value earlier, right? So value is the benefit that is derived out of your deliverable. So that's as simple as we can put because there is no standard definition. Right? Value may mean different to different organizations, but end of the day, our context is what matters. We as project manager, when we are put in a project, we have to define what is value for that project, and then build all our aspects around that definition of value. So, as per PMI, value delivery system is a collection of strategic business activities aimed at building, sustaining, and advancing an organization. So, if I have to put it simply for you, it is considering the entire organization when it comes to value delivery. It's not only the project, it's also the horizontals and verticals of project as well. The creation of value is supported by various components like portfolios, programs, projects, products, and operations. This is what I was explaining in the previous paragraph, right? So let's try to understand this. This is a bit complicated as of now. Let's try to understand this pictorially in the next slide. Right. So if you take a typical organization, right, we have programs and projects. Right? We know that, and then these programs and projects, most of the times, they end up as operations. Right. Whatever they deliver, they may end up in operations that are repetitive, day-to-day operations. And then these programs and projects, depending on the size of the organization, they do report to portfolios or they are consolidated under portfolios. And finally, we have the senior leadership, right, that governs everything around portfolios, programs, and projects. Now, how does value delivery system come around this, right? The senior leadership provides strategy to the portfolios. So all your projects and programs are directly or indirectly aligned to strategic goals of the organization. So that's how you have strategy connected. How do portfolios direct programs and projects, right? So they define the desired outcomes, benefits, and values. Right? This is what initiates a project. A project is officially initiated in an organization because the organization feels there is a certain set of desired outcomes, benefits, and values. The last word is why we are talking this, right? Now, once a project is delivered and it becomes a day-to-day operation, then you have maintenance and other things coming into picture. That's how operations get into picture. If you look at this diagram, right, between the two rectangles, we are talking about desired outcomes, benefits, and values. So that is the driving force. So this value definition comes right from how you strategize in your organization and how that gets consolidated under portfolio and gets delivered as a project. Now, now from here, what does operations do? Right, they give updates, fixes, and adjustments, and they may communicate with projects again. Now, projects would have to report back to portfolios. They would report back on the performance of the project, the progress of the project, right? And then portfolios will consolidate and give a summarized view to the senior leadership, right? The definition of value and how you measure it comes into picture here. And overall, outcomes, benefits, and value performance analysis. Okay, so this is how ecosystem around the how you deliver value, and this is what value delivery system is as per PMBOK 7th edition. And then we'll talk about performance domains, right? Performance domains come under the second part of PMBOK 7th edition. It is uh, as per PMBOK, a performance domain is a group of related activities that are critical for the effective delivery of project outcomes, right? If I have to put it in layman's term, you as a project manager, you do a lot of activities, right? A lot of processes. If you group them together, all related project processes or activities, it forms a performance domain, and we look at them now, right? So there are 8 performance domains defined in our PMBOK 7th edition, right? These are the 8 performance domains, and we'll quickly go through each one of them, right? So stakeholder, we talked about stakeholder, right? Anyone who impacts a project, who can impact the project, or who gets impacted by the project is a stakeholder, right? So you as a project manager, all the activities revolving around this performance domain is it includes things like stakeholder engagement. You identify the stakeholder, you analyze the stakeholder, his power, his interest, his influence, etc., and you engage the stakeholder, and then you monitor the stakeholder as the project progresses. The next performance domain, the second out of 8, is a team performance domain. This has all the activities related to how do you lead the team, right? It has aspects of your leadership styles. There are many types of leadership styles, and a project manager need not stick to a single leadership style. He can change his leadership style based on the situation as well. You have your team culture, and most importantly, you have something called shared goals, right? Uh, PMBOK 7th edition, as a matter of fact, most of the model agile frameworks as well talk about shared goals. Gone are the days where every individual is given a task and is asked for accountability to that task, right? Now, shared goals is tying that individual's task with the common team's goals. Now, this way, everyone becomes accountable to what the team achieves, and everyone will be striving to meet the team's goal rather than the individual goal. So this is very important aspect from PMP perspective as well, right? We have shared goals with the teams. And then finally, we have something called emotional intelligence. Right? Emotional intelligence is the ability to judge the emotions of others, particularly your team members and the stakeholders and yourself, and then you act accordingly as a project manager. Now, this is not something new. The topic may be new in documentation, but again, project managers are instinctively uh, aware of emotional intelligence, right? So we know we interact with different people with different uh, psychologies, and we instinctively gather a skill set on how do we handle people based on situations, right? So this is a separate topic itself in your PMBOK and PMP exam, right? So deciding the development approach and life cycle is also a performance domain, right? You may opt to go with a predictive or waterfall methodology. You may opt to go with adaptive or agile methodology, or a hybrid methodology for say, right? So this is also performance domain. And if you go hybrid, you may opt either of iterative and or incremental based on the nature of your project. All your planning activities come under planning performance domain. Now, if you look at it, I'll be giving a slider at the end of this. Uh, you may be seeing a similarities between knowledge areas and performance domains, right? So they have regrouped it to make logical sense for more modern projects. So your planning can be scope planning or your estimates or schedule planning, your budgeting and resourcing, communications plan, change management. So all these come under planning performance domain. So your project work, the actual work that is getting done in the project is also performance domain, particularly managing the physical resources, right? When you talk about physical resources, we'll talk about procurement as well. So engagement and communication of stakeholders is also part of your project work. Procurements, right? Physical resources and procurements go hand in hand. Learnings, right? Your lessons learned should also be part of project work performance domain. The actual execution of project, right? What is the execution of project? Is nothing but following the plan, right? What are you planned in the planning performance domain? You are going to follow the plan, nothing but your delivery. So you may have things like definition of done and ready, value delivery, quality, right? Quality is also imbibed inside performance domain, right? It's not a separate performance domain per se. Measurement. Now you have planned, now you have started delivering, right? But are you delivering at the right pace? Are you behind schedule or ahead of schedule? Is the quality good? All these questions can be answered from the tools that we use in the measurement performance domain. So you can measure the metrics in your project. You have information radiators, right, which are more popular in your agile world, like your burn down charts, burn up charts, your Kanban board. These are all information radiators. Your key performance indicators, right? You may define your key performance indicators of your project the beginning, and then you can measure it while you are delivering to see whether you are on track. And you have variance analysis, right? You can measure the cost variance, you can measure the schedule variance, and then decide whether the project is on track or out of track. That can be a good measurement. Your uncertainty is nothing but risk, if you ask me, right? It's also a performance domain, right? It can include the complexity of the project. Complexity brings uncertainty as well, right? It can bring volatility, right? Your project may be subject to constant changes. That brings uncertainty as well. Ambiguity, right? Ambiguity is having too many options and not able to take a decision. That is ambiguity as well, right? So that can bring uncertainty. Risks bring uncertainty. So this performance domain deals with handling uncertainty. So tailoring, we talked about tailoring earlier, right? As part of principle, it's also a performance domain. Now, before we go there, what can we tailor in a project, right? So PMBOK 7th edition is pretty clear about what can be tailored in a project, right? The first thing is development approach. You can tailor the development approach. It is pretty straightforward. You either go take one of the frameworks from your adaptive model, if the project suits for it. You can go the classic traditional waterfall or predictive model, the project suits for it. Or you can go the hybrid way. You can tailor the processes, right? Once you tailor the development approach, the next step is obviously what are the different phases, sub phases or sub processes within. Now you can tailor that as well. Engagement, right? How do you engage with different stakeholders? How do you engage within the team and outside the team? Can also be tailored. Tools can be tailored as well. Like what tools are you going to use? The tools need not be a software or hardware tools. It can also be the techniques that you use. It can be your meeting techniques or estimation techniques, for example, right? So what estimation techniques would you use for this project, depending on the nature of the project? You can tailor that as well. And finally, methods and artifacts. Right. So PMBOK 7th edition puts a lot of rationale around this, a lot of attributes and characteristics around this, based on which you can apply the same on your project and tailor it accordingly. And then finally, we have models, methods, and artifacts. Now, for those who are familiar with earlier versions of PMBOK editions, like sixth edition, before that, we had something called ITTOs, inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs, right? So inputs had a set of artifacts, tools and techniques had certain set of artifacts or tools and techniques, and then outputs had artifacts or any outcomes. So that had been revamped into something called models, methods, and artifacts, right? So a model is a thinking strategy to explain a process, framework, or phenomenon, right? So we can have different models based on different situations, the project, or which part of the project you are on. So a method is a means for achieving an outcome, output result, or project deliverable. Is nothing but tools and techniques. Right? An artifact can be a template, document, output, or a project deliverable. Right? So in the PMBOK 7th edition, you have a complete matrix as and when on different models, what methods can be applied, and what are the artifacts that you are going to get out of it. Now, I mentioned earlier and throughout this session that the 7th edition is radically changed from the previous editions, right? And it is by far probably the most significant edition to come from PMI since its history. Right? Everything had been gradual so far from the first edition to sixth edition. There were no sudden changes edition to edition, right? But seventh edition has been hugely significant. Now, if you look at it, if you remember one of the earlier slides, I was talking about the classic project management process groups. We had five of them, right? Now, if they had been what I would say evolved into principles on the right side in the seventh edition. Like you see 12 of the principles which have evolved based on the industry trends from five process groups. The second major change is that all your knowledge areas, right? If you look at the left side, the earlier versions of PMBOK, you can see that they are more or less similar to performance domains that we talked about so far, right? So we have nine of them. In fact, 10 of them with the sixth edition. So if you see there, you have all the aspects of project management, like your scope, your schedule, cost, quality, resources, communication, risk, procurement, and stakeholders. They had been rationalized and then grouped more logically into performance domain in the seventh edition. That we have 8 performance domains, which we talked about briefly a while back. So that these two are the major changes. Now, before I conclude, any questions or any thoughts on top of your mind from your experience or on from this session, anything that you can unmute and ask.
Hi, this is Anand Srinivasan. Thank you for this wonderful session, Mr. Janagiram. I appreciate your time here. So, my question is, when do you think, or when can we anticipate the PMBOK 7 will be the official guide to be followed? I'm yet to be certified though in PMP, and that's why I'm wondering, or I have this question.
Okay. Okay, good. That's a very good question. That's the same question I had for PMI 2 months back. Okay, now it took a while for me to digest something. Okay, as of now, as we speak today, PMBOK 6th edition is the primary reference guide for your PMP exam, right? But then, PMBOK 7th edition, if you start going through it, it actually reflects pretty much the same concepts, but just that structured differently. Now, let me give an example. You have something called ECO. Your PMP exam is not based on your PMBOK structure. It's based on something called ECO, Examination Content Outline. Okay, so your ECO has something called domains and tasks. Okay, let me put it here for you. Your examination content outline for PMP has something called domains and tasks. Okay, uh, domains, again, we have three different types: people, process, and business environment. Okay, so all the topics, all the syllabus that you see in our PMBOK editions will come under this. Now, if I look at seventh edition and sixth edition, if I compare them, both of them still map to the ECO. So, if I have to answer your question simply, you primarily refer to the PMBOK sixth edition, but I am strongly recommending my students to go through the seventh edition as well to understand the principles and the models, methods, and artifacts. But the underlying content is pretty much the same, right? If you look at the PMBOK 6th edition, it goes hand in hand with something called Agile Practice Guide. The seventh edition, a lot of that has been into a single umbrella, right? So that's how it is. So use the sixth edition primarily, and then you can refer to the seventh edition as well. It's not going to be that you are going to refer to two different books because the topics are going to be the same underneath. So there are not big changes there.
Sure. Thank you,
It-
Sujana. I appreciate
Sure. I'm extending my answer because others are listening, right? So, the primary goal of PMI is to enhance the standards of project management, and they have been doing wonderfully good so far, right? So, you can see that a person who is PMP certified, you can clearly see uh, a difference in his work, the way he approaches problems, the way he handles work as a project manager. So, the way you should look at PMBOK guide is more of an instruction manual for project manager, so that will help you your day-to-day life as a project manager. So for exam it is just one of the reference guides, but it can help you streamline your thought process as well. Yes.
Hi Jankiran, this is Nimesh here. Thank you so much for a wonderful session.
Yes,
Out
indeed.
of my curiosity, I just have a small question. How do we differentiate between PMP and Prince 2? Actually, I'm a little confused about it. Which one should I go for? Currently, like I'm working as a senior Scrum Master as well as like Agile Project Manager. Now I'm
Hmm.
looking for some project management certification. Which,
Okay.
according to you, should I choose and in what case, like out of Prince 2 and PMP?
Okay, it's a common question everybody has, but let me put you let me set your thought process here. What are you going to trying to benefit from the certification? So what are your goals from the certification?
It's just about upgradation. I want to get into a little more. I just want to upgrade myself, not just stick
Yeah.
to the Scrum
Okay.
basic Scrum Master role. And yeah,
Okay.
so I want to go
Sure.
into yeah, please.
Sure. So both are proven frameworks in the market, right? PMP versus Prince 2 is a separate webinar by itself, but I'll try to give a short logical answer to you. We do certifications for a couple of reasons, right? Primarily to enhance our skill set, right? That is one of the reasons. Second thing is for
Okay.
our career advancement. As a project manager, we want to advance our career, explore larger projects, complex projects, and all. Thirdly, for our remuneration as well, right? It helps our remuneration. So if you look at
Yeah.
all these three aspects, now uh, PMP leads the market. There was a survey that was done in early 2020, I believe. It's called PMI Salary Survey. So PMI conducts a salary survey in the market. They try to compare certified project managers with non-certified and then see how they differ, right? So on an
Mhm.
average, they observed that 22% the certified project managers, the PMP certified project managers, they earn 22% more than non-certified project managers, right? So that was one outcome of the survey. The second outcome of another survey from PMI was that uh, 3 out of 5 projects uh, were successfully delivered because the managers were PMP certified. Okay, so you have
Okay.
two aspects here: efficiency as a project manager with better skill set, and your remuneration and career advancement, right? And most importantly, the recognition of the certification across industries across the globe.
Mhm.
Right. So if
Mhm.
you look at all these aspects, PMP scores hands down on any other certification in the market. So I would
Okay.
strongly recommend go for PMP because it is accepted globally. Carries goodwill, and it can help you advance your career as
Okay. Sure. Thank you so much.
well. Sure. Yeah. So for all of your information, right? So as we mentioned earlier, we are authorized training partners with PMI, and we have PMI authorized PMP instructors. I am one of them. So we have a batch upcoming on 9th of October, and anybody is interested can reach out to us and enroll for the course.
Hi, Mr. Janagiram. This is Anand
Yes.
again.
Yes.
I have one more quick question here. So, at the beginning of this session, you informed us like PMBOK is one of the reference or study guide for the PMP. Do you think or can you suggest any additional material, or is that required to take the PMP exam in the future?
Sure. Sure. There are many. Okay. What I recommend is there is a book called PMP Prep Course from Rita Mulcahy. Okay. Don't struggle with the spelling. You can go to Tech Canvas YouTube channel, and I have a webinar called PMP Prep Strategy.
Mhm.
Okay. So I have mentioned how should you prepare for PMP and what are the course materials required for you. You can get details there.
Sure.
But for the record, one recommendation is to have a prep course book called prep guide book called Rita Mulcahy PMP Prep Guide.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, time is up. Any questions from anyone finally before we close? Okay, I'll take that as a no. And in case if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. You can put it under the YouTube video of this webinar. We can get back to you. And I wish you all good luck with your pursuit of PMP. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the session, and thank you, Janaki. It was very insightful session. I will just stop the recording here.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.